On the night of April 26, 1986, an explosion occurred at the fourth reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This accident became the largest man-made disaster of the 20th century. As a result of the explosion, a huge amount of radioactive substances was released into the environment, affecting a vast number of people and animals. In this video, I invite you to learn about the most interesting things and findings related to the Chernobyl nuclear accident. When the terrible accident occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and it became clear that the consequences were catastrophic, residents of nearby settlements were evacuated. By law, these people could transfer their homes to the state and receive housing in other safe regions in return. Most local residents accepted this offer, but there were still those who refused to leave their homes. During the implementation of this program, more than 116,000 people were relocated, but about 800 people continued to live in radiation-contaminated settlements. Interestingly, the majority of them were women. Moreover, these people were willing to do anything to remain in their native homes. Even the fact that radiation could lead to serious health problems and even death did not frighten them. These people, despite all bans and warnings, continue to live in settlements located in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Mostly, they are elderly individuals. They choose to live out their lives in difficult conditions of their own volition. From these people, one can often hear the phrase, "We were born here, we will die here." It reflects their inner conviction and willingness to accept the consequences of their choice. Currently, there is an organization in the exclusion zone called Revival of Chernobyl, which helps people living in radiation-contaminated settlements solve their problems. At the entrance to the 30-kilometer exclusion zone around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, there is a special warning sign. This sign serves as an important reminder that being in this area can be very dangerous. Of course, the safety system of the exclusion zone is not limited to signs alone. Fences with barbed wire have been installed around the perimeter of the hazardous territory, and entry is controlled through special checkpoints. Radiation monitoring in the exclusion zone is carried out constantly. Special services regularly measure radiation levels in different parts of the contaminated area, and although the radiation background decreases every year, being in this zone still remains unsafe. For this reason, warning signs are not just a formality, but an important element of the safety system aimed at preventing unauthorized access to this area. And although almost 40 years have passed since the accident, warning signs remain relevant. They help protect people from the harmful effects of irradiation and serve as a reminder of the tragic events that occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1986. Chernobyl and Pripyat. Two different cities bound by one common tragic fate. Both Chernobyl and Pripyat were abandoned after the accident at the fourth reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. In these cities, many items still remain as reminders of the terrible catastrophe, most notably numerous gas masks. Gas masks have practically become a symbol of this horrific man-made disaster. Although without special protective suits, they likely could not have saved people from radiation. In both Chernobyl and Pripyat, gas masks can be found in a variety of places. In schools, they lie on desks, on the floor, and in special boxes. In hospitals, they are found in doctors' offices and medical supply storage areas. In residential buildings, they can be discovered in hallways, on windowsills, and even in children's rooms next to toys. The most well-known place with a huge number of gas masks is school number 3 in the city of Pripyat. In one of its classrooms, the floor is literally covered with these protective devices. The preserved gas masks add to the grim atmosphere of the two abandoned cities. They serve as a reminder of how suddenly and tragically the lives of tens of thousands of people changed. People who had to leave everything behind and flee, not even having time to use protective equipment. After the news of the man-made disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant spread around the world and the cities of Chernobyl and Pripyat were completely abandoned, the exclusion zone began to gain popularity among stalkers, enthusiasts of illegal tourism. Despite all the security systems and the incredible risks of being in this area, daredevils still illegally entered the most dangerous places and explored them. Gradually, radiation levels in many abandoned settlements began to decrease, and staying there for short periods became almost safe. For this reason, in 2002, certain areas of the exclusion zone were opened for visits, but only with special permission. 8 years later, the zone was open to everyone. This became a real sensation, and thousands of tourists from all over the world decided to take part in this risky journey. The reason for such interest was not only the tragedy associated with the Chernobyl accident, but also the unique opportunity to see places that were literally frozen in time. In 2011, free access to the exclusion zone was closed. Now, entry to Pripyat, Chernobyl, and certain abandoned villages is only possible with prior permission. Excursions are conducted in organized groups under the guidance of experienced guides and only in safe zones. As a rule, tourists spend the night outside the exclusion zone, even if the route lasts several days. The main attractions of the excursions are the abandoned buildings of Pripyat and Chernobyl, the famous Ferris wheel in Pripyat, and of course, the new protective dome of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant occurred on the night of April 25 to 26, 1986. Residents of all nearby settlements were peacefully sleeping, unaware that a terrible tragedy was unfolding dangerously close to their homes. When the scale of the catastrophe became known to the authorities, they were in no hurry to take action to save the population. The first reports of radiation leakage appeared only several hours after the explosion, and only in the evening of April 27th, 36 hours after the accident, did the evacuation of Pripyat residents begin, a city located just 3 kilometers from the power plant. However, at that time, not all locals understood the seriousness of the situation. People were given only 2-3 hours to gather their belongings, without any explanation of what was happening or when they would be able to return home. For this reason, residents took only documents and a few personal items with them. The authorities' main goal was to avoid panic among the population. Therefore, people were reassured that nothing terrible had happened and that they would soon return home. Moreover, no one told them about the real danger of radiation, which was already spreading through the area. This led many locals to believe they were safe and to secretly return to their homes, continuing to live in areas where radiation levels remained dangerously high. In total, more than 115,000 people were evacuated. Many of them lost not only their homes, but also their health. Children born after the accident were particularly affected. Many of them were found to have various congenital pathologies. It may seem that the authorities tried to maintain calm and carried out an evacuation, but the lack of accurate information was precisely what caused a large number of people to suffer from the consequences of the man-made disaster. It is horrifying to learn that residents of the settlements that ended up in the exclusion zone only will learn the truth after high radiation levels were detected in Sweden. At that point, the authorities were forced to make an official statement and tell the world the truth about what had happened. Many people visit Pripyat and Chernobyl to immerse themselves in the atmosphere of abandoned cities and literally feel like a character in a post-apocalyptic movie or game. One of the most popular abandoned places in the city of Pripyat is Medical Sanitary Unit number 126. This place can be called a symbol of hopelessness and horror. The hospital was built shortly before the disaster occurred. Once a modern building, it has now turned into a silent witness of the terrible tragedy, which is echoed in everything around it. In front of the main entrance to the hospital lies an overgrown park, which was once well kept and gave the place a special beauty. Inside the medical unit, one can see endless corridors where life once bustled. Now, they are filled with a deadly silence. The dusty air inside the building is saturated with an atmosphere of inexplicable sorrow, as if the walls want to tell the details of the catastrophe but cannot find the words. From the empty corridors, one can enter equally deserted wards with hospital beds, wooden nightstands, and even forgotten personal belongings. Once inside this hospital, it feels as if time has stopped. The most chilling place in this hospital is the basement, where the firefighters who responded to the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster were brought. Being in this area is strictly prohibited, as it is believed that the belongings of these people are still stored there. The radiation levels in some parts of the basement reach incredible values even decades after the tragedy. Chernobyl and Pripyat attract not only fans of dark tourism, but also creative individuals. Today, in Pripyat, one can see many paintings on the walls of various buildings done in dark colors. These works were created by artists from different parts of the world. All of them entered the city illegally, but their goal was to bring the abandoned city to life through art. The Shadows of Chernobyl project is unique and carries a very deep meaning. The artists did not just create random drawings, each one worked within a unified concept. At first glance, the artworks appear to be actual shadows of local residents. For example, the image of a little girl who cannot reach the elevator button in a high-rise building, or the image of a woman on the rooftop near the main checkpoint, staring in horror at the destroyed reactor. Despite the uniqueness of this project, opinions about it are divided. Some admire the artist's idea, while others believe that creating artwork on the walls of abandoned buildings is unacceptable and consider this form of expression to be vandalism. One of the most recognizable places in the city of Pripyat is the city park. It was built in 1986 and was meant to be a recreational area for the city's residents. The main attraction of the park was a huge Ferris wheel. Its grand opening was scheduled for May 1st, 1986. The residents of Pripyat were looking forward to the event, but just 5 days before it, the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant occurred, forever changing the fate of the city and its park. This park never welcomed a single visitor and has remained empty ever since. Today, it is occasionally visited by small groups of tourists. The city park is considered one of the most contaminated places in Pripyat because it was used as a landing strip for aircraft involved in the initial liquidation of the disaster's consequences. It is believed that the highest radiation levels are found beneath the seats of the Ferris wheel and inside the bumper cars. The abandoned park of Pripyat has become a kind of symbol of the deserted city and the Chernobyl tragedy as a whole, but it has also served as a source of inspiration for many talented individuals. Its grim beauty has been reflected in documentaries and feature films, television shows, and video games. The story of the Red Forest is a tragic one and clearly illustrates how human technological progress can destroy the beauty of wild nature in mere seconds. Before the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, it was just an ordinary pine forest with its own ecosystem. However, it was located close to the power plant and, at the moment of the explosion, absorbed the majority of the toxic fallout. The Red Forest got its name for a reason. A high dose of absorbed radiation during the reactor explosion led to the death of all trees over an area of approximately 2 square kilometers in just 30 minutes. And they turned a reddish-brown color. Sometime after the man-made disaster, scientists began to actively study the Red Forest. They divided the affected area into 4 categories, according to the degree of radiation exposure. In the most dangerous part of the forest, covering about 45 square kilometers, radiation levels remain highly hazardous to this day. Meanwhile, the safest zone is now almost completely decontaminated. Initially, scientists believed the forest would be able to cleanse itself naturally, but it later became clear that due to the characteristics of coniferous trees, which do not shed their needles for 2 or 3 years, this process would take an extremely long time. For this reason, it was decided to cut down the entire forest area. While contamination would still remain in the soil, clearing the vegetation would significantly speed up the decontamination process. In the 2000s, scientists began efforts to restore the forest. However, the radiation situation in certain parts of the Red Forest continues to be difficult. Perhaps one of the most well-known structures on the territory of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant is the protective structure known as the new Safe Confinement, or the Dome. The dome was built in 2007, 31 years after the catastrophe. It is a gigantic movable structure weighing more than 36,000 tons and standing about 108 meters tall. This protective object is designed to last 100 years and can withstand extreme temperatures and natural disasters. The main purpose of the confinement is, of course, to protect the environment from possible radiation spread, but it also serves to isolate the object from external influences, particularly from rain and meltwater. Inside the dome, there is a special control room to monitor all ongoing processes. Before the construction of the confinement, all protective functions were carried out by a structure known as the sarcophagus. It was built in record time, only 200 days. Initially, it was assumed the sarcophagus would last for 20 years, but it still remains today. The new Safe Confinement has become a kind of landmark of Chernobyl. Today, it not only fulfills its primary functions, but also attracts a large number of tourists wishing to experience the atmosphere of the city where a terrible man-made disaster occurred. As a result of the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a huge amount of radioactive substances was released into the environment. Undoubtedly, this caused significant changes in the flora and fauna of the nearby area. Many animals began to suffer from mutations. One such anomaly affected birds. In studies conducted to investigate the effects of radiation on the environment, scientists discovered birds with extra toes in the forests of Chernobyl. This genetic mutation is most commonly found among species of the sparrow and crow families, which inhabit the most contaminated areas. The anomaly can manifest in different ways. Some birds grow one or several extra toes, while others show a splitting of existing ones. Interestingly, such changes also affect the bird's life activity in various ways. Some individuals demonstrate excellent dexterity thanks to the extra toes, while others experience difficulties walking. Radiation exposure affects not only physical structure, but also bird behavior. In some species, migration paths and seasonal cycles have changed. The study of birds and other animals that have undergone genetic mutations in the Chernobyl exclusion zone helps scientists understand how living organisms can adapt to extreme conditions and what consequences radiation exposure may have on the ecosystem as a whole. The consequences of the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant caused serious damage to the environment. And although nearly 40 years have passed since the man-made disaster, many animals living in the exclusion zone continue to exhibit signs of genetic mutations. Currently, scientists are studying various living organisms that have been exposed to radioactive substances. Among them are wolves. Biologists have noticed that many of the wolves living in the exclusion zone have strange curled tails. Normally, wolves have straight tails, which are most often hanging down. Therefore, such an anatomical structure immediately attracted the attention of scientists. In the process of studying these unusual wolves with curled tails, biologists discovered an even more surprising feature of the Chernobyl specimens. It turns out that these predators are exposed to more than 11 millibars of radiation daily, which is 6 times the safe level for humans. Constant exposure to such a radioactive environment has led to the development of genomes in these animals that are resistant to cancer. The changes in the wolves' bodies are similar to those that occur in humans during radiation therapy. This discovery has provided scientists with new opportunities to study mechanisms of cancer resistance. The accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had a colossal impact on the health and bodies of animals. It is hard to believe, but some forest dwellers were able to adapt to the consequences of the disaster and even benefit from it. In conditions where human activity was reduced to a minimum, the ecological balance began to recover. Scientists noted an increase in the population of such animals as wolves and lynxes. These predators became stronger and more adaptive. In addition, the region began to see a resurgence in species that had previously disappeared from the area, particularly white cranes. However, the man-made disaster had a very negative effect on the health of domestic livestock offspring. In 1990, about 400 deformed animals were born with serious developmental defects. Most of them lived only a few hours. The most horrific mutations were seen in cows, pigs, and sheep. Calves were born with deformed limbs, skull abnormalities, and other congenital anomalies. In pigs, there were cases of piglets being born missing body parts or with abnormal internal organs. These kinds of changes occurred due to the effects of radiation on embryonic cells. Radiation not only caused physical anomalies, but also affected animal behavior and reproductive functions. Scientific studies in recent years have shown that even decades after the man-made disaster, radioactive contamination continues to negatively impact the health of certain animal species. Some of the most talked about inhabitants of the Chernobyl exclusion zone are the giant catfish in the cooling pond of the nuclear power plant. These fish were released into the reservoir as juveniles shortly before the disaster occurred. This was done specifically to demonstrate the safety of the station's operation for living organisms. After the accident, no one thought about the fish anymore, and when Chernobyl became open for visitors, the catfish were immediately noticed by tourists and became a kind of local attraction. It would indeed be hard not to notice these fish. The Chernobyl catfish reach lengths of over 3 meters. However, scientists assure us that they have perfectly normal sizes for their species. These fish are not mutants, but have simply managed to grow to impressive sizes due to the absence of human interference. Scientists are, in fact, surprised that these fish have not suffered any negative effects from radioactive substances. The catfish in the cooling pond belong to the species known as the European catfish. Under good conditions, these fish can reach 5 meters in length and weigh around 400 kilograms. However, such individuals are very rare, which is why the Chernobyl catfish astonish tourists. The aftermath of the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant changed not only the ecology of the region, but also the lives of most local animals. Many species developed genetic mutations, while others have managed to find a way to adapt to extreme conditions of high radiation. Eastern tree frogs, common in the exclusion zone, have demonstrated accelerated evolution. Recently, during the study of the consequences of the man-made disaster, Spanish biologists from the University of Oviedo discovered around 200 unusual specimens of eastern tree frogs in the swamps near the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The scientists were surprised to see almost black tree frogs, as this species usually has a bright green color. What also intrigued the biologists was that the closer the frogs lived to the epicenter of the accident, the darker they were. Several frogs were taken to the laboratory for further study. During their analysis, the scientists discovered the secret of the unusual coloration of the Chernobyl frogs. It turns out that the tree frogs learned to produce melanin. This pigment is responsible for the color of the skin, hair, and eyes. The more melanin, the darker the color. Melanin not only gives color, but also protects against ultraviolet radiation and, as it turns out, can reduce the harmful effects of radiation. Dark-colored frogs had a higher chance of survival than bright green ones, so the tree frogs began to adapt to the new conditions by darkening. Interestingly, in such a short period of time evolution, this useful information began to be passed on to the frog's offspring at the genetic level, and young individuals began to be born already with a high concentration of melanin and, accordingly, with dark-colored skin. After the evacuation of people from Pripyat and Chernobyl, many stray dogs were left on the streets of these cities. Most of them formed packs and managed to survive, despite the radiation and the absence of humans. Today, around 800 dogs live in the exclusion zone, and of course, scientists are actively studying them. For this purpose, the Chernobyl Dog Research Initiative was launched in 2017. Its participants not only study the genetic mutations of the dogs, but also provide help to these animals by supplying food and veterinary care. Particularly valuable for science are the dogs living directly on the grounds of the nuclear plant. This is because their ancestors received the highest doses of radiation. Interestingly, the entire pack descends from 2 German shepherds left behind by their owners during the evacuation. During their research, scientists faced many challenges. These dogs do indeed exhibit mutations, but they could have resulted from inbreeding or from long-term exposure near the nuclear power plant. Scientists are interested in whether these mutations are actually hereditary. It will take specialists at least 10 years to answer this question. Barn swallows, like many other inhabitants of the exclusion zone, have become subjects of scientific research. These birds were found to have genetic mutations that appeared as a result of radiation contamination in the environment. In the early 2000s, scientists recorded remarkable mutations in swallows, among which partial albinism, lightening of the plumage, became especially noticeable. However, this was not the only anomaly. Swallows also exhibited beak deformation, growth of disproportionate feathers, and changes in brain size. Yet despite all the mutations, the birds continue to nest in the exclusion zone. Their population has significantly increased and continues to grow. Scientists believe that the absence of humans in their habitats has become a positive factor for the reproduction of the birds. The study of barn swallows, just like other animals with anomalies, helps scientists better understand how living organisms can adapt to life under new conditions and how elevated radiation levels affect their health and biological functions. The Chernobyl exclusion zone covers an area of 2,800 square kilometers. After the nuclear accident, a nature reserve was established in this territory, which became the third largest in Europe. Scientists began studying the impact of the man-made disaster on the surrounding environment and discovered many new insights. Many believe that the territory affected by the release of radioactive substances is barren and completely deserted. But scientific research shows the opposite. Unlike humans, animals and plants have learned to adapt to the new conditions. Undoubtedly, the consequences of the accident had a harmful effect on some animals, particularly with the appearance of genetic mutations, but overall, the exclusion zone has begun to transform into an astonishing kingdom of wildlife with a vast biodiversity. After the accident, most radioactive substances decayed rapidly. Within a month, only a few % of the initial contamination remained, and after a year, this figure dropped to less than 1%. Studies showed that from 1987 to 1996, the populations of wild boar, moose, and roe deer increased sharply. By the mid-1990s, there was also a significant rise in the number of wolves. Additionally, in this area free from human presence, previously extinct animals began to reappear, such as Eurasian lynxes, brown bears, black storks, and bison. Currently, hundreds of species of plants and animals have been registered in the exclusion zone, including more than 60 rare species. It sounds strange, but the man-made disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant led to the local forest system not only beginning to recover, but becoming richer in biodiversity and more resilient to climate change and even forest fires. This story happened in with two friends who preferred not to reveal their names. The young men had long dreamed of visiting Pripyat, the abandoned city located in the exclusion zone, because they were fascinated by the atmosphere of a place where time seemed to have stopped in 1986. The friends prepared thoroughly for the trip, studied the routes and safety rules. However, they were not ready for the mystical event that occurred during their journey. On the very first night, while walking through the city park, the young men heard a child's laughter. It sounded unnatural and came from the direction of the old Ferris wheel, whose empty cabins creaked in the wind. Suddenly, the laughter turned into a quiet voice calling for help. The friends were very frightened, but decided to follow the voice. This led them to the entrance of an abandoned school building. Entering the half-ruined building, the travelers saw a blurry silhouette of a dancing girl. At that moment, they were seized by true horror. They realized they were witnessing a mystical phenomenon. This fear made the friends run away and never return to that city. Of course, this story may seem fictional, but in fact, many people believe that truly inexplicable supernatural phenomena occur in the exclusion zone. It so happened that after the disaster, Chernobyl became shrouded in mystique and secrets. That is why the abandoned city is often visited by adventurers and paranormal researchers. According to numerous stories, ghostly screams can be heard in the abandoned buildings, and some people even claim to have seen them with their own eyes. In addition, it is believed that creepy humanoid monsters resembling zombies live in the outskirts of the city. Of course, it all sounds like fiction, but take a look at this photo, published by a stalker on social media. According to him, while exploring the abandoned buildings of Chernobyl, he came across a deserted house where the owner's belongings were still present. On a table, amidst the dust and cobwebs, he found an old box. Upon opening it, he discovered several photographs, among which was the image you now see on your screen. The stalker felt it was important to share this unique find with his followers. This photo leads one to think that all the creepy monsters and ghosts of Chernobyl may not be fiction. The Chernobyl exclusion zone is often associated with mystical phenomena. Of course, this should come as no surprise, since the atmosphere in this region seems to evoke thoughts of something eerie and otherworldly. However, as it turns out, the legends of mystical creatures in Chernobyl appeared even before the accident at the power plant occurred. According to several employees of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, just hours before the tragedy, they witnessed a supernatural event. In the night sky, a black creature appeared with a human body, giant wings, and glowing red eyes. Locals nicknamed it the Black Thrush. They believe that this monster is a harbinger of terrible tragedies and massive loss of life. It only appears when something truly dreadful is about to happen, something that humanity will remember for a long time. Interestingly, a similar creature was seen by residents of the state of Virginia shortly before the collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15, 1967. That incident claimed the lives of 46 people and seriously injured 9 others. Many believe that this story is fictional, but if so, it remains unclear why the employees of the power plant who narrowly escaped death would lie, and why people in 2 different countries would describe seeing the same mysterious creature. And that's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon. Your engagement is the best reward for me. Thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye.